What is going on, you guys, and welcome back to another Q&A late night here on the Sergeant Tank Pets YouTube channel. Go ahead and let me know down in the comment section what you may like to see in the future. Well, Devin is wondering as far as let me find a question here. What plants recommended for a low-tech tank with Plecos? By the way, I'm new to your channel and just subscribed. Well, thanks so much, Devin. I appreciate it. As far as with Plecos, depending on the species of Plecos, typically when I hear Plecos, you're probably referring to your common ancestris and your Bristol species. So with that being said, mostly floating plants is honestly what I keep. Any type of sword plants, anything that they can get their mouth around and start mowing away, as long as you keep them fed. I do have some of our systems where I do have some various sword plants, Valsnaria, Sagittaria. They will kind of sift through, of course, the substrate. So if you have a really fine substrate, keep that in mind because they can uproot, especially like stem plants and that you may, or even rhizome that you may actually put in the substrate. So ways around that, you can use like terracotta pots. You can weigh it down. If you're using like a Nubius and you glue it like on a piece of driftwood or something like that, that could be another option, is some Anubias. But I would say for the most part, it really comes with trial and error, and it really depends on how many species you're keeping within that tank, and really a lot of factors go into it, especially with plants. And when you're talking like Plecos and some cichlids and that type of stuff. So hopefully I answer your question for you. Lumpy Dog is wondering the Xiphophorus maculatus, which is one of our strains of golden leopard platies. I'm still working with them. The thing is, the problem was when I first obtained them, I ended up losing the male. Shared that. That was, gosh, a long time ago. And then I got a couple out in our 300-gallon stock tank. And then I'm looking at right now one of our fish rooms, a group of them as well. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what type of lineage I get out of it. The unfortunate thing is nobody has available any males I need, because they only have females, unfortunately. And I have it all on a spreadsheet. So to make it fair, once I start getting any production, and if it's not what I'm looking for as far as genetics and stuff, then I won't even waste anybody's time, because I only want to provide exactly what's there. But there's a lot of fish that we have that we don't offer on the website. What I always do is, I'm a hobbyist at heart, and if you guys are in or around the Michigan area, and if you ever had the opportunity to make it to GVAC, which is Grand Valley Aquarium Club, is my local club here in the Grand Rapids market here in Michigan, you can always check it out. It's a wonderful club to be a part of, but usually during our spring and annual auction, I'll auction off a lot of stuff, and I provide it here locally. And I do that for a couple of different reasons. Is first and foremost, I want to support local clubs. I mean, that's always been a mission of mine. And second of all, local clubs and hobbyists. And then second of all, if anything in the unfortunate event ever happened with my colony, it's a lot easier for me to go to somebody here that I know locally than try to track it down, down south, out west, even out east. So yeah, it's always nice to know if you guys are really into breeding, especially harder to come by fish or whatever it is that you're breeding, always keep track of where that goes. It's a very important thing to do. Try to keep contact information on file, just in the unfortunate event if anything ever happened. That's why I talked before about the key role in redundancy and just making sure that you maintain several different systems with that same species, with that same genetic line. So I always try to have 2 or 3 additional systems. It doesn't matter what I'm breeding at any given time, just in case one of those systems ever crashed. Then I have something to fall back on. Justin said, wish more people are in the natives. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of rules and regulations that go. You got to technically have, especially here in Michigan, a specific permit when it comes to collecting if you do it in accordance with the law. But I agree. I mean, native species are definitely nice. but you really can be treading on some thin ice depending on what your ordinances are. Can you run different live bearing fish in one central sump system without cross issues? I mean, if it's the same species, so let's say you take like a since we're talking about platies, let's say you're in reference to different color morph, but as long as same species, they're all going to interbreed. So you just got to be careful with that. I mean, if you're taking for sure two different species, you could be looking at hybridizing, depending on what it is. But you know, if you're looking at, I'm more of a purist, and I'll be the first one to say that. So what I mean by purist is if I'm obtaining a specific fish, especially if it's a Charis fish, that type of stuff. I really just focus on purity, where I keep them as a species only tank, and I don't mix any other fish with it. But you can have some benefits when it comes to introducing other varieties of that species, is because of the pheromones and so forth that are released within the water. That's why a lot of people, you know, as I've talked about before, taking, you know, some tank water, even if you're trying to breed ancestors Plecos. I mean, you could take, let's say you just obtain a trio or a reverse trio, whatever it is, and now you're trying to trigger the spawning besides mimicking the rainy season. What I find even better is just taking, you know, some water from a proven system where they're showing spawning behaviors, that type of thing, and you go ahead and introduce it. As long as you're not, make sure it's your own systems where you're not cross-contaminating. But, you know, setting that aside, if everything seems to be going smooth, no disease, that type of stuff, I would just take some water, go ahead and introduce it into that system that you're trying to trigger them to spawn. You can hit them with a small water change, maybe bring the temperature down a little bit to kind of mimic the rainy season. Usually you'll be able to trigger most of the spawning. I wonder if I still have marble crayfish. We met at Something Fishy in Cleveland. Dan, yeah, we still do. I don't think that they're currently on the website. We've already sold out of what we have, and I won't be selling any until I get more up in production. But I've been dealing with fish, or specifically crayfish, as long as I've been dealing with shrimp, and that's been over 13 years. So I used to deal a lot with the Clark eye species, which is an invasive species now, so I no longer deal with them. But with the Procobaris phalax, which is your marbled, or marmot crabs, which is just a German way of saying marbled, crayfish that Dan is talking about, they're commonly used for feeders. I mean, you can feed them to turtles, puffers, that type of thing. But they reproduce so many, especially once they get to, you know, full maturity, and it takes up a lot of real estate. What temp do you reckon that you can safely get Malawi down to, and two situations of breeding maintenance? Late Malawi, the actual conditions of late Malawi, I think is oftentimes a big misconception. As I've shared before, especially in the wintertime here in Michigan, even with having a 30,000 BTU heater where we can kind of keep the ambient room temperature usually around 72 comfortably. So with that being said, I've bred myself, like just use an example, the Libidochromis, which is your electric yellow lab. So I've bred those in 70, 72 with no problem. And for me, I am without drawing this out into a very long topic, because I've talked about it several times, you guys are wanting to know a little bit more behind the basis and the concept of my thought process behind it, is to check out a video that I did. I want to say it was titled Conditioning Your Fish. If you just go to our YouTube videos and you put in search and you just start typing in conditioning, it should pop up. And I covered it in a lot more greater detail. But I would say easily 72, 73, just fine. And I'm just not a huge fan of individuals keeping tanks in the 80s. I just not a fan of it at all. And maybe one day I'll do a talk specifically on that. I might do an article on it. But for me personally, I've seen a lot more issues because of the metabolism. And there's a lot of factors that go into it. I'm just trying to simplify it as best as I can. I have talked about it a lot with other hobbyists locally, and I've had other people incorporate some of the methods that I've explained, and they're having better success not only with breeding, but also being able to keep their fish alive. And you know, metabolism is a very important thing, especially oxygen exchange and everything else that goes along with it. So I don't just look at temperature. I look at all the factors that go into place. I look at general hardness, carbonate hardness. I look at TDS. I look at my nitrate levels. I look at oxygen. I look at many different factors within that ecosystem, depending on what I'm trying to do with it. I really like the format of your Facebook page and the tone in the participants. Very nice. Thanks so much, Bob. I really appreciate it. Best thing I can tell you guys is to get an idea of the actual climate for which they actually come from and then condition them from there. And I'm saying that very loosely, is when I'm taking in, let's say, a wild caught fish, I'm conditioning it completely different and breeding it completely different than I would be bringing in something that's captively raised. I was just at a gentleman's house that's been around for many years, breeds a ton of angels, very nice angel fish, and a ton of discus. And nothing special as far as pretty much half RO, half tap, and then slowly once the fry get to a certain age, you'll go ahead and start slowly transitioning and acclimatizing those over to handle the more alkaline water as we have just out of our tap. Obviously preconditioned water. But other than that, I mean, there's just really captive. I don't know how much I can talk about this. It really, I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of a rant, but I've talked about it before, is there's a point of mimicking what happens in nature to get an understanding behind the basis and how fish spawn and what their behaviors are. But as far as mimicking water parameters coming from something of a very acidic pH of like 6 or even mid 5s to something where now it's been conditioned genetically through so many offspring, is now you can essentially start breeding some of these species within more alkaline water. And it's just more stressful, I find, when individuals, and I've gone through this myself, that's why I'm explaining to you guys, is I've tried mimicking some of those natural quote unquote habitats and what the water parameters are, and it just really, really is stressful. But like I said, it's apples to oranges. You know, if we're talking wild caught versus captively raised, captively bred, then it really is just, it's apples to oranges. It's a whole different conversation. To me, it's just really common sense. You know, keep things consistent. And I just find that hobbyists will be a lot more effective and they'll stay around a lot longer in the game if they're just be more consistent on just everything in the hobby. And of course, do your research. As always, stay encouraged. Keep on keeping on. Happy fishing. And we'll talk to you guys right back here on the next one.